shouldn't have listened.
We didn't go back to the cabin right away. None of us said it out loud, but the idea of stepping back inside that space, after the water, the voice, the way the walls moved, felt impossible. We stood just beyond the first set of path markers, huddled together in the trees, breath tearing out of our lungs in white bursts. The forest was wrong in a different way than the cabin. It wasn't aggressive. It was restrained. No wind, no insects, no distant animal sounds. The quiet here felt organized, like the absence of noise was being enforced. Kyle bent forward with his hands on his knees, trying not to retch. Jess rubbed his back automatically, even though her own hands were shaking. Aaron paced a few steps back and forth, stopping himself each time he got too far from the rest of us. Mark crouched near a tree, eyes locked on the darkness behind us, like he expected something to follow. The cabin sat back in the clearing, dark and still. No lights, no movement. If not for the water seeping out earlier, it could have been empty again. Just a building. Kyle straightened slowly. "We can't stay out here," he whispered. "We'll freeze." Jess nodded. "But we don't go back inside like before." Aaron looked between the trees. "So what, sleep standing up?" Mark finally spoke. His voice sounded hollow. "The rules didn't say we couldn't leave the cabin." Kyle stared at him. "They said stay on marked paths." Mark swallowed. "We are." That was true. We were still between the posts. The realization didn't make me feel better. We followed the markers deeper into the trees, moving carefully, like we were afraid the ground itself might notice us. The posts appeared ahead of us in pairs, just visible enough in the dim light to guide us forward. They weren't evenly spaced. Some were close together, others far enough apart that we had to search for the next set. The deeper we went, the colder it felt. Not the normal cold of winter, but a penetrating chill that seemed to ignore our layers and settle directly into muscle and bone. We found a slight dip in the ground where the trees formed a rough circle, branches overlapping overhead. It wasn't a clearing exactly, more like a pocket where the forest folded in on itself. Kyle stopped there. "We rest," he said, "just for a bit." No one argued. We didn't sit. Sitting felt like committing. We leaned against trees, shoulders touching, sharing warmth and fear in equal measure. Time stretched. I don't know how long we stood there. Long enough for the panic to dull into something heavier and quieter. Long enough for the cold to start demanding attention again. That's when the whispering started. At first I thought it was the wind finding a way back in, a soft movement at the edge of hearing. But it wasn't consistent, and it wasn't coming from one direction. It came from between the trees. Not voices, exactly, more like fragments of breath carrying half words that never finished forming. Jess stiffened beside me. "Do you hear that?" Kyle nodded slowly. "Don't answer." The whispering shifted. It grew closer. Not advancing, not retreating, just adjusting its distance, like it was trying to find the range where we'd react. Aaron whispered, "It sounds like..." Jess squeezed his arm hard enough to cut him off. The whispering changed again. This time, it took shape. "My name," something murmured. Kyle flinched. Another voice answered, overlapping it. "Your name." Mark pressed his back harder into the tree. "It's copying," he whispered. "It's practicing." The whispering circled us now, threading through the branches overhead, curling around our ears. "Say it," one voice breathed. "No," Kyle whispered. "No names." The forest responded by going even quieter. The posts around us creaked. Not all of them, just one, then another. The sound of wood under slow pressure. I turned and saw one of the markers tilting slightly inward, its top leaning closer to the space we occupied. Jess saw it too. "Kyle?" Another post shifted. The ring tightened. "They're moving," Aaron whispered. Kyle nodded. "Stay inside." "Inside what?" Mark whispered back. Kyle didn't answer because he didn't have one. The whispering grew more confident. "I know you," it said, and this time the voice was closer to mine than I liked. "I know where you stand." The tree at my back shuddered gently, bark brushing my jacket as if adjusting its position. Jess gasped softly. Kyle spoke through clenched teeth. "We move. Now." We stepped together, slow and careful, slipping between the nearest set of posts. The moment we crossed the boundary, the whispering cut off sharply like a radio being shut down mid-sentence. The forest exhaled. Sound rushed back in all at once, wind through branches, the faint crack of ice in the studi. Distance, our own ragged breathing. We didn't stop moving. The posts guided us downhill toward a darker stretch of forest where the trees grew closer together and the ground dipped toward the waterline. Kyle slowed when we reached the edge of a narrow inlet. The lake was barely visible through the trees, its surface black and still. "This is wrong," Jess whispered. Kyle nodded. "Yeah." A third sheet of paper lay pinned to a tree near the water, held in place by a rusted nail. None of us touched it. We leaned close enough to read. Night 3. Movement will be corrected. Staying still is not safety. If you are touched, do not pull away. Mark let out a thin, broken laugh. "That's insane." Kyle stared at the last line. "It's not advice," he said. "It's instruction." Behind us, somewhere up the slope, a post creaked again. Closer. The lake's surface rippled once as if something just beneath it had shifted position. And for the first time since we arrived, I felt certain of something. Whatever this place was, it was done asking. It had started enforcing. The first touch came without warning. Not a grab, not a strike, just contact. Something brushed the back of my calf, light and deliberate, like a hand passing through water. Every instinct in my body screamed to jerk away. The words on the paper flared in my mind, sharp and ugly. "If you are touched, do not pull away." I froze. Jess gasped beside me, and I knew she'd felt it too. Kyle's shoulders went rigid. Aaron let out a sound halfway between a breath and a prayer. The touch lingered. Pressure increased just enough to let me know it wasn't accidental. It slid upward an inch, slow, exploratory. I didn't move. The thing touching me adjusted like it noticed my compliance. The pressure eased, then withdrew completely. A second later, the same sensation brushed Kyle's arm. He inhaled sharply through his nose and stayed still. Around us, the forest shifted, not all at once, one element at a time. A branch lowered slightly. A tree trunk leaned just enough to narrow the space. The posts behind us creaked again, wood bending inward, patient and methodical. "It's hurting us," Jess whispered. Kyle nodded once. "Toward the water." The lake lay just ahead, a dark, flat presence that seemed to absorb the little light the forest allowed. The inlet was narrow, framed by trees that bent inward like ribs. We took a step forward together. The ground near the shoreline was softer, damp under the thin crust of snow. My boot sank slightly and I felt cold seep in immediately. Another touch came, this one firmer, at the small of my back. I didn't pull away. Aaron wasn't as lucky. Something brushed his wrist and he flinched before he could stop himself. He pulled his arm back instinctively. The reaction was instant. The forest answered with force. A sharp pressure snapped around Aaron's forearm, not a hand, but something broader, heavier, like the weight of water given shape. He cried out as it tightened, yanking him a half step backward. "Kyle!" he yelled. Kyle spun, grabbing Aaron's shoulder to keep him upright. "Don't fight it," Kyle said through clenched teeth. "Don't pull." Aaron's breathing went ragged. "It hurts." The pressure shifted, sliding up Aaron's arms slowly, deliberately, as if correcting him. The grip loosened only when he stopped resisting completely. The moment he went still, it released him. Aaron sagged, clutching his arm. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to." The whispering returned, faint but pleased. "Learning," it breathed. Jess's eyes were wide with terror and understanding. "It's training us." The water at the edge of the inlet moved then, not a splash, a displacement. Something large repositioning just beneath the surface. Kyle stared at it, jaw clenched. "We don't go in," he said. "That's not part of it." The whispering disagreed. A hand rose from the lake. Not a human hand. Too long. Fingers, stretched thin, joints bending at angles that felt wrong even at a distance. Water streamed from it in steady rivulets, dark and reflective. It didn't reach for us. It pointed. At the path. At the markers leading back toward the cabin. A command. Kyle swallowed hard. "It wants us to go back." Jess shook her head slowly. "That's a trap." Mark spoke for the first time in minutes, voice barely there. "Everything is a trap." The hand lowered back into the water without a splash. The whispering faded. The forest released a fraction of its pressure, enough to let us breathe again. Kyle made the call. "We go back. Together. Slow." We followed the markers uphill, every step measured. No one spoke. The forest watched us pass, branches shifting subtly, posts creaking as we crossed each boundary. By the time the cabin came back into view, my legs were shaking from more than cold. The cabin looked unchanged. No lights, no water spilling, just dark wood and still windows. Kyle stopped at the edge of the clearing. "If it tries to separate us," he said quietly, "we don't let it." Jess nodded. Aaron nodded. Mark didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. We crossed the clearing as one. The door opened easily. Inside, the cabin smelled dry. Normal. Too normal. We didn't relax. We sat together on the floor near the fire, backs touching, lantern turned low. No one took the loft. No one moved far enough to break contact. Hours passed. Nothing happened. That scared me more than the touches. Sometime deep into the night, the journal slid out of the storage chest on its own and fell open in the middle of the room. None of us touched it. Kyle leaned forward just enough to read without moving his feet. A new line had appeared beneath the Day 3 entry. Correction successful. Below that, another line, still wet with ink. Tomorrow, it will test who can be led. The lantern flickered. Outside, something heavy moved along the path toward the cabin, slow and deliberate, staying perfectly between the markers. Night 3 ended with us awake, huddled together, knowing with sick certainty that the island no longer needed to ask or imitate. It knew how to guide, and soon it would decide who followed. Morning didn't feel earned. Light crept into the clearing like it was checking whether it was allowed. The cabin looked the same as it had every other morning, walls intact, windows dull with frost. But the silence outside carried a different weight, less curious, more settled. Kyle was the first to speak. His voice sounded scraped, raw. "We don't follow anything today." No one argued. Aaron's arm had gone a deep purple where the pressure had tightened the night before. He kept flexing his fingers like he didn't trust them to keep working. Jess cleaned the marks gently, methodical, her hands steady in the way people get when panic has already burned through them once. Mark sat with his back to the wall, eyes tracking the corners of the room. He looked thinner, like the night had taken something small but important from him. We ate without appetite. The journal stayed closed. No one wanted to see what it had decided overnight. Outside, the markers were different again. Not moved, adjusted. The spacing between pairs had changed just enough to suggest a route that hadn't existed before. A gentle curve away from the cabin, deeper into the trees, angled toward a ridge on the far side of the island. "It's a suggestion," Jess said quietly. Kyle shook his head. "It's a command." We stayed in the clearing all morning, doing busy work that didn't matter, restacking wood, checking supplies we already knew were fine, anything to avoid choosing. Around noon, the wind picked up suddenly, sharp and cold, cutting across the clearing in uneven bursts. Snow lifted off the ground and swirled, then dropped again. The trees creaked, branches bending inward like they were listening for something. That's when we heard the bell. It was faint at first, almost mistaken for wind chime noise or ice shifting on the lake. A single dull chime, then another. Kyle went still. "That's not here," he said. The sound came again, clearer this time. Metal on metal. Slow, deliberate. "It's coming from the ridge," Mark whispered. Jess shook her head. "There's no bell out here." The chime sounded again, closer now. Aaron swallowed. "It sounds like a buoy." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "There are no buoys on this side of the island." The sound repeated, each chime pulling attention toward the new path the markers were quietly outlining. I felt the same pressure I'd felt on night one, the sense of being evaluated, measured against an expectation. "Lead," I whispered, thinking of the journal. Kyle heard it. "Nobody goes alone," he said. "If we move together." The bell chimed again. This time, something answered it from the trees. Not a sound, a shift. The forest adjusted its posture, branches angling subtly toward the suggested path. Jess closed her eyes briefly. "If we don't go," she said, "it'll make us." Kyle didn't respond right away. Then he nodded once. "We go slow. We stop if anything changes." The path between the markers felt narrower than it had the night before. The air inside it was colder, flatter. Sound dropped away as soon as we stepped between the posts, like the world outside the lane had been muted. The bell continued ahead of us, chiming at irregular intervals. Sometimes it sounded close, sometimes far enough that it felt like it might be pulling away. "Don't speed up," Kyle warned. We followed. The ridge rose gradually, the ground sloping upward beneath our feet. Trees grew closer together. Snow thinned where the earth was exposed, dark and damp. Halfway up, Jess stumbled. Not tripped, stopped. She froze mid-step, breath hitching. "What?" Kyle whispered. She shook her head slowly. The ground moved. We looked down. The soil beneath her boot was compressed, oval-shaped, like something had stood there recently. Not a footprint, a pause. Mark whispered, "It waited." The bell chimed again, closer now. We crested the ridge and found the source. An old iron bell hung from a rough wooden frame lashed between two trees. The metal was pitted with rust, damp with lake water that dripped steadily from its rim. There was no rope attached. The bell swayed gently anyway. Under it, the ground was soaked. Kyle stared at it, jaw tight. "It wants us to ring it." "No," Jess said immediately. The bell chimed again on its own. A voice spoke from behind us. Not close, not far. "Choose." The markers at the edge of the ridge creaked, leaning inward a fraction. The bell swung a little wider, and I understood then what Night 4 was for. It wasn't about following. It was about consent. Nobody moved. The bell swayed once more, slow and patient, like it had all the time in the world. Water dripped from its rim, each drop landing with a soft, obscene plink into the mud below. "Choose," the voice said again. It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound pleased. It sounded administrative. Kyle stepped half a pace forward before he could stop himself. Jess caught his sleeve instantly. "No," she whispered. "That's the point. It wants a decision." Kyle's jaw worked. "If we don't ring it, it'll count that too," Jess said. "Doing nothing is still doing something." The markers around the ridge creaked again, wood bending under pressure that had no visible source. The trees leaned inward just enough to remind us they were part of this. Aaron's voice shook. "What happens if we ring it?" The voice answered him immediately. "Then you agree to be guided." Mark laughed once, sharp and broken. "And if we don't?" The bell stopped moving. The forest held its breath. Then the ground behind us shifted. Not a step, not a collapse, a reallocation of space. One of the markers slid inward, closing off the path we'd used to climb the ridge. Another adjusted on the opposite side, narrowing our options. Kyle swore under his breath. "It's closing exits." Jess's eyes flicked between the bell and the tightening markers. "It's making the choice smaller." The bell chimed once. A suggestion. Kyle looked at each of us in turn. His eyes lingered on Aaron's bruised arm, on Mark's pale face, on Jess's clenched jaw. "If we ring it," Kyle said quietly, "we tell it we'll listen." "And if we don't," Jess replied, "it'll pick a way for us to listen." The bell swayed again, wider this time. Water splashed from its rim. The voice softened. "It's only a sound," it said. "You already hear me." That was when Mark stepped forward. "Don't!" Jess snapped, but she was half a second too late. Mark didn't reach for the bell. He stepped beneath it. The air changed immediately. The forest went flat and soundless, like it had been padded on all sides. The bell stilled, hanging perfectly motionless above Mark's head. Mark stood very straight, eyes unfocused. "Mark," Kyle said carefully. "Step back." Mark didn't respond. "Mark!" Jess said louder. The bell rang once, not swung, rung. A deep, heavy note that traveled through the ground more than the air. I felt it in my teeth, in my chest, in places that didn't have words. Mark gasped. Water poured from the bell, cascading over him in a sudden sheet. He cried out, dropping to his knees as the mud beneath him liquefied, sucking at his boots. Kyle lunged forward, grabbing Mark under the arms. Jess grabbed Kyle. Aaron grabbed Jess. For a moment, we were a chain. The voice spoke over us, calm and precise. Agreement noted. The ground pulled harder. Mark screamed, not in pain, but in terror. "It's pulling me down!" Kyle strained, muscles shaking. "Let go of the bell!" he shouted. Mark's hands were clenched in the air, empty. he wasn't holding anything. The bell rang again. This time, the markers around the ridge lurched inward, sharply. One of the posts cracked, wood splitting under pressure. Jess screamed, "Kyle, let him go!" Kyle didn't listen. The mud surged once more, then stopped abruptly, like someone cut a line. Mark collapsed forward, sobbing, soaked to the waist in freezing water. Kyle and Jess dragged him back, away from the bell, slipping and falling in the mud. The bell stilled. The forest exhaled. Mark lay on the ground, shaking uncontrollably. His clothes were soaked through, teeth chattering violently. Jess tore off her jacket and wrapped it around him, hands moving fast and practiced. Kyle stared at the bell, chest heaving. "It counted that," he said. "Didn't it?" The voice answered, satisfied. "Yes." "What did it count?" Aaron demanded. The bell rang softly once more. "Submission," the voice said, "without completion." Jess looked up sharply. "Without completion?" The voice paused, as if considering phrasing. "He did not finish agreeing." The markers behind us creaked, reopening just enough to form a path back down the ridge. Kyle helped Mark to his feet. Mark leaned heavily on him, barely able to stand. "We go," Kyle said. "Now." We didn't wait for permission. The path back felt different, less resistant, like the forest was letting us retreat because it had gotten what it wanted. The bell didn't follow, but the sound of it did. A low, distant resonance that stayed in the air long after we left the ridge. By the time the cabin came back into view, Mark was barely conscious. His skin felt wrong when I touched his arm, not just cold, but slack, like the tension that held him together had been loosened. Inside the cabin, we stripped his wet clothes and wrapped him in blankets near the fire. It took a long time before the shivering slowed. When Mark finally opened his eyes, they didn't track right away. "Did you hear it?" he whispered. "Hear what?" Jess asked. "The bell," he said. "Even when it stopped ringing, it kept ringing inside me." Kyle closed his eyes. That night, we didn't leave the fire. We didn't speak unless we had to. Sometime after midnight, the journal slid out of the chest again. No one touched it. Kyle read from where he sat. "Night 4, he said quietly. "Consent obtained. Partial compliance." Below that, a new line had appeared, the ink still wet. "Tomorrow it will choose who follows." Outside, far off in the trees, a bell rang once. And this time, it was not alone. Something answered it from the other side of the island. Mark didn't wake up the same. He opened his eyes in the morning, but they didn't arrive all at once. It was like he had to remember how to be in them. Jess noticed first. She was the one closest to him, sitting cross-legged near the fire, watching his breathing like she'd been doing all night. "Mark," she said gently. He blinked. Slow. Too slow. Kyle leaned in. "Hey, you with us?" Mark's gaze drifted past him toward the far wall. "The bell's still moving," he said. Kyle stiffened. "There is no bell here." Mark frowned as if that didn't match what he was hearing. "I know," he said. "That's why it's loud." No one spoke after that. We kept him inside all morning. Jess checked his pupils. Aaron tried to get him to drink something warm. Mark complied with everything, but there was a lag now between being asked and doing. Like instructions had to travel farther to reach him. The journal stayed closed, but none of us stopped thinking about the line written the night before. "Tomorrow, it will choose who follows." Kyle said it first, finally. "It already chose." Jess looked at him. You don't know that. Kyle nodded toward Mark. Look at him. Mark was sitting by the window, staring at the tree line with an expression that wasn't fear. It was focus. Aaron swallowed. He didn't go anywhere. Neither did the bell, Kyle said. That didn't stop it. We didn't leave the clearing that day. The markers at the edge of it had shifted again overnight, not closer, more aligned, like something had straightened them. From where we stood, they formed a clear corridor leading away from the cabin toward the eastern side of the island. None of us stepped into it. Around midday, Mark stood up. I need to check something, he said. Kyle reacted instantly, blocking his path. No! Mark looked at him, confused. I was asked. Jess's breath caught. Asked by who? Mark tilted his head slightly, listening. It didn't use words. Aaron shook his head hard. You're not going anywhere alone. Mark didn't argue. He just waited. That scared me more than if he'd tried to push past. The waiting stretched. The forest stayed quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind. The lake beyond the trees was perfectly still, like a sheet of black glass. Then the sound came. Not the bell. Footsteps. Not close, not far. Measured. Coming along the marked corridor. Kyle whispered, Everyone inside. We moved into the cabin together, but Mark lagged. Not resisting, just slow. Kyle had to take his arm and guide him. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. A voice called out. Not Mark's voice this time. Mine. Hey, it said from outside the cabin. It's okay. You can come out. My stomach dropped. Jess looked at me, eyes wide. Don't listen. The voice sounded right. My cadence, my hesitation before certain words. Even the way I dragged the last syllable of a sentence when I wasn't sure of myself. I just want to talk, it said. Kyle barred the door again. Mark leaned closer to it, breathing shallow. That's you, he whispered to me. It knows you. The voice tried again, softer now. You don't have to be afraid. You're already doing well. Jess covered her ears. Aaron squeezed his eyes shut. I stood there, frozen, with the unsettling realization that it wasn't trying to scare us. It was reassuring me. Outside, the footsteps shifted position, circling the cabin slowly, staying perfectly within the markers. Each step landed with quiet certainty. Which one follows? The voice asked gently. Mark took a step forward. Kyle grabbed him. No! Mark didn't fight. He just looked at Kyle with something like disappointment. It's my turn, he said. The journal slid out of the chest again and fell open at our feet. No one touched it. A new line had appeared beneath the last. Selection in progress. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door, and then the knock came. Not urgent, not threatening. One soft knock. Waiting. No one answered the knock. The sound wasn't loud enough to force a reaction. It was calibrated for hesitation. A polite interruption, the kind that makes you feel rude for ignoring it. Mark shifted again. Kyle tightened his grip on his arm. Mark, Kyle whispered, look at me. Mark's eyes slid to him, unfocused for a beat before settling. It's waiting, he said. It doesn't like being ignored. Jess shook her head violently. We are not opening that door. The knock came again. Same rhythm, same softness. I felt my own voice outside change tone, grow more patient. You don't have to choose him, it said. You can choose someone else. Aaron made a small, broken sound. That's messed up. Kyle leaned closer to the door without touching it. "You don't get to pick," he said, voice low and steady. "Nobody goes." The voice paused, as if processing. Then it laughed. It was my laugh, the short exhale I make when I don't know what else to do. "You already agreed to listen," it said. "This is just the next instruction." The cabin creaked softly, responding, not in protest, in acknowledgement. Mark stiffened. Kyle felt it before he saw it. Mark's weight shifted suddenly, not forward but sideways. His feet slid across the floor like the friction had been reduced. Kyle swore and tightened his grip, but Mark's arm twisted in his hands with unnatural ease. Jess lunged, grabbing Mark's other side. For a moment, the three of them held. Then something pulled. Not a yank, not a grab, a directive. Mark's body obeyed it. He slipped free of Kyle's grip like his joints had been loosened, his shoulders compressing just enough to slide out of Jess's hold. He stumbled backward, not panicked, not fighting, following. The door unbarred itself. The chair scraped aside on its own, wood dragging across the floor with a dull screech. Cold air poured in. The voice stood just outside, still, wearing my sound. "Good," it said. "That's good." Kyle shouted Mark's name and dove forward, but the floor between them slicked suddenly, damp and cold. His boots slid, sending him down hard. Mark stepped over the threshold. The moment he crossed it, the voice stopped using my tone. It didn't need to anymore. Mark turned back once. His eyes were calm. "Don't follow," he said. Then he was gone. The door slammed shut on its own. Silence crashed down hard enough to make my ears ring. Jess screamed Mark's name and threw herself at the door. Kyle dragged her back, wrapping his arms around her as she fought him, sobbing. "No," she kept saying. "No, no, no!" Aaron stood frozen, face gray, staring at the closed door like he expected it to open again. Outside, footsteps moved away. Not fast, not sneaking. Certain. The markers creaked as they adjusted, opening a corridor into the trees. The journal lay open on the floor. Kyle forced himself to look. "Night 5, he read hoarsely. "Follower selected." Below it, written in darker ink, "Separation achieved." Jess collapsed against the wall, shaking violently. Kyle slid down beside her, still holding on, like letting go might make the loss real. Aaron sank into a chair, head in his hands. "We can't stay," he whispered. "We can't." Kyle stared at the door. "If we leave the paths," he said slowly, "it'll correct us." "And if we stay?" I asked. Kyle didn't answer. That night, the forest did not whisper. It did not knock. It did not speak. Instead, it demonstrated. Something heavy moved back and forth outside the cabin for hours, staying just beyond the windows, just within the markers. We could hear the wet displacement of its steps, the way water dragged against bark and soil. At one point, we heard Mark's voice, not calling for help, repeating instructions. "Stay together," he said, flat and wrong. "Don't run. Listen." Jess covered her ears and screamed until her voice gave out. Kyle sat rigid, hatchet in his lap, eyes fixed on the door. By morning, the markers had changed again. One corridor led back to the dock, another led deeper into the island. The one toward the dock was narrower. The journal slid open one last time before dawn. Kyle read the final line of the night. "Tomorrow, it will test who remains." We were down one person, and the island was not done choosing. We didn't say Mark's name out loud that morning. Not because of a rule we'd read, but because saying it felt like tugging on a thread we couldn't afford to pull. Jess stared at the door for a long time after the light came up, like she expected him to be standing there, waiting to be let back in. Kyle kept moving, restless, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. Aaron sat at the table with his hands flat on the wood, grounding himself, breathing in counts of 4. The journal stayed shut. Outside, the markers had made their decision visible. 2 corridors, one toward the dock, narrow, pinched, the posts leaning inward like they didn't want us to pass. The other deeper into the island, wider, straighter, newly aligned, as if someone had taken care to make it inviting. Remain, the journal had said. I didn't need to open it to hear that word again. Kyle stood at the edge of the clearing, staring down both lanes. It wants us split, he said. Finally. That's the test. Jess shook her head. No splitting. Aaron swallowed. If we go to the dock together, it'll correct us. And if we don't, Kyle said, it'll keep taking. The forest answered him with a sound like wood under slow pressure. One of the dockside posts creaked, tilting a fraction closer to its mate. The choice got smaller. Kyle closed his eyes, then opened them. We move toward the dock, he said. Together. Slow. If it pushes, we stop. Jess grabbed his sleeve. It took Mark. Kyle's voice broke just a little. I know. We stepped into the narrow lane. The world flattened instantly. Sound dropped away. The air grew colder and thinner, like we'd climbed a mountain without moving our feet. My breath came out shallow and sharp. Halfway down the corridor, the first correction came. Not a touch, a weight. The ground beneath Aaron's right foot softened, giving way just enough to pull him a half step sideways. He stumbled, caught himself, then froze. Don't pull, Kyle said quickly. Aaron went still. The pressure eased. We took another step together. The lake came into view through the trees, dark and unmoving. The dock looked farther away than it should have been. The distance stretched like elastic. Then the voice spoke again, not from behind us, from ahead. Too many, it said calmly. Jess's nails dug into my arm. We're not splitting, Kyle said. The voice paused as if considering. Then it demonstrated. A shadow detached itself from the trees along the deeper corridor, the wider path, and moved toward us, keeping perfectly within the posts. It didn't rush. It didn't hide. It walked. As it drew closer, details refused to settle. The outline suggested a person, but the proportions were wrong. The shoulders sloped too far. The head dipped at an angle that made my stomach turn. It stopped at the point where the 2 corridors nearly touched, and it spoke in Mark's voice. Stay, it said. I'm okay. Jess let out a strangled sound. Kyle took a step forward without meaning to. The shadow tilted its head. You can go, it said, still Mark. I'll remain. The markers around the deeper corridor shifted, opening wider. The dockside posts creaked again, closing tighter. The choice shrank to a breath. That's not him, Aaron whispered. The thing smiled. Not with a mouth, with compliance. Remain, it said again. The pressure on the dock corridor increased, squeezing my chest, making every breath feel like a negotiation. Kyle's hands shook. He looked at Jess, at Aaron, at me. It's lying, he said, like he needed to hear it himself. The shadow took one step closer. The forest leaned in. And that's when the water moved. Not the lake. inside the corridor. A thin line of dampness appeared at our feet, spreading across the snow like a spill that refused to stop. It crept toward us, deliberate and quiet. "Remain," the voice said, now layered, Mark's tone braided with something deeper. Jess screamed, "No!" Kyle made a choice. "Back," he said. "We go back." We stepped together, reversing, careful not to break contact. The pressure resisted us, then yielded an inch. Another step, another inch. The shadow advanced to compensate, staying perfectly aligned with the deeper corridor, never crossing into ours. "Too many," it repeated, patient. We reached the edge of the clearing and spilled out of the lane like we'd escaped a vice. Sound rushed back in all at once. Wind, branches, our own ragged breaths. The shadow stopped. The markers reset. The corridors remained. The message was clear. Night 6 wasn't about leaving. It was about who was allowed to stay. And the island was done pretending it needed all of us. We didn't go back into the cabin right away. The clearing felt exposed now, like a stage we'd stepped onto without meaning to. The corridors still existed at the edges of it, the posts standing straighter than they ever had, as if proud of the work they were doing. Kyle paced in a tight loop, running both hands through his hair. "It's trying to thin us out," he said, "one by one." Jess hugged herself, shoulders hunched. "Then we don't let it." Aaron laughed once, sharp and humorless. "How? It took Mark without touching him." No one answered that. When we finally went back inside, the cabin felt neutral. Not safe, not hostile. Like it was waiting to see which way we'd lean next. Kyle closed the door but didn't bar it. The chair stayed where it was. Jess noticed. "Why didn't you?" "It knows," Kyle said. "That stuff's for us, not it." Night fell fast, faster than before. The fire burned low even though Kyle fed it twice. The heat refused to spread. Cold pressed in from the walls, settling around our ankles like water rising inch by inch. None of us lay down. We sat in a triangle near the fire, Kyle, Jess, Aaron, while I leaned against the wall, watching the windows. The journal lay on the table between us, closed, but it felt heavier than it had any right to. Around midnight, the first sound came. Not footsteps. Breathing. Outside the cabin. Slow. Even. Close enough that it fogged the glass in front of Jess's face. She froze, breath caught halfway in. Kyle whispered, "Don't look." The breathing continued, patient. Then another breath joined it, and another. 3 distinct rhythms. "Too many," the voice said softly from everywhere and nowhere. "Correction pending." The window darkened as something pressed close to it, blocking what little moonlight there was. The shape was wrong, too tall, too narrow. But it stayed just out of focus, like it didn't want to be seen clearly yet. Jess shook her head, tears streaking down her face. "We're not choosing," she whispered. "We're not." The journal slid open on the table by itself. Kyle's jaw tightened. He didn't touch it. He read anyway. "Night 6, he said quietly. "Resistance observed." The fire crackled sharply, then dropped, flames shrinking as if starved. Outside, 1 set of footsteps moved away from the cabin. 2 remained. The pressure in the room shifted immediately. Less heavy, more precise. "Remain," the voice said again. 2 is sufficient. Aaron stood up so fast his chair fell over. "No," he said, louder than he meant to. "No way. We don't play that game." The breathing outside the window stopped. The silence that followed was surgical. Aaron swallowed and sat back down slowly, as if he'd realized he'd overplayed his hand. Then the door opened. Not slammed. Opened. Cold air slid in along the floor, bringing with it the smell of lake water and something metallic beneath it. Kyle rose, hatchet in hand, placing himself between the door and the rest of us. A figure stood just outside the threshold. Not fully formed, not fully human. It wore Mark's height, Mark's outline, but the surface of it moved like water under skin, features never settling long enough to be real. "Remain," it said in Mark's voice. Kyle shook his head. "You already took one." The thing tilted its head. "Balance requires subtraction." It stepped forward. The floor beneath it darkened, damp spreading in a slow halo. Jess screamed Kyle's name as the pressure hit him, harder than anything we'd felt before. He staggered, knees buckling, breath crushed out of his chest. "Don't pull!" Jess sobbed, clinging to him. "Don't fight it!" Kyle went still. The pressure eased slightly, like a hand loosening its grip but not letting go. The figure leaned closer, its face inches from Kyle's. "Choose," it said softly, "or I will." Jess looked at Aaron. Aaron looked at me. And in that moment, the island got exactly what it wanted. Fear shifted. Not outward, inward. Kyle gasped suddenly, sucking in air like he'd been underwater too long. He shoved himself upright, not fighting the pressure, but redirecting it. "Go," he said to us. "Run, both of you." Jess screamed, "No!" Kyle met her eyes, steady now. "It needs balance," he said. "I'm already halfway gone." The figure stilled, listening. Kyle took one step forward, deliberate. "I remain," he said. The words landed heavy, like a final stamp on paper. The pressure vanished from him instantly. It hit us instead. Jess and Aaron were thrown backward as if the air itself had turned solid. I slammed into the wall, stars bursting behind my eyes. Kyle stepped out onto the threshold. Jess crawled toward him, sobbing. "Kyle, please." He didn't look back. The figure reached out. Not grabbing, not pulling, just guiding. Kyle crossed the boundary. The door closed behind him on its own. The cabin went silent. No breathing, no footsteps, just absence. Jess collapsed onto the floor, screaming until her voice broke. Aaron sat stunned, eyes empty, hands shaking violently. The journal lay open on the table. I forced myself to look. Night 6, it read. Balance restored. Below it, a new line formed, the ink spreading slowly as if written from within the page. Tomorrow, it will test who remembers. Outside, the markers shifted again. This time, there was only one corridor left, and it did not lead to the dock.